Hello and welcome to INE's CCI Service Provider version 5 Learning Path. Today in this course we would talk about single level ISIS. Now single level ISIS is different when you have all the routers in the same area, something like OSPF. Let's say if I put all the routers in one area, in ISIS that would be called as single level ISIS. So as you know, there are two different routing types or two different levels of routing. We have level 1 routing, which is usually intra-area routing, and then we have level 2 routing, which could be intra-area or could be inter-area. So here we are only going to talk about single level, which means that all the routers are going to be in the same area, so same level of routing. So here is an example of a Cisco IOS router being configured for it to be in area 49001. All of these numbers are basically in hex parameters. So we have the area portion, which is the first part. The second part is the system ID, which is the three sections that we see is your system ID, and then we have your NCell, which is your network selector. The IS type has been configured as level 2 only. By default, all routers run level 1, level 2 router. So there are three different types of routers. If you remember from the previous course, we had three different types of routers. We had level 1 router, we had level 1, 2 router, which is something like an ABR in OSPF, and then we have level 2 router. A level 1 router can only communicate with another level 1 in the same area or an L1, L2 router in the same area. A level 2 router can form adjacency with another level 2 router or a level 1, level 2 or another level 2 router in a different area. So here, as per this configuration, we have activated OSPF and we have defined the net statement. We have defined the area, we have defined the system ID, which has to be unique across the board. And then we have changed the router type to be level 2 only. As far as iOS XR is concerned, the commands are pretty much similar to iOS XE, with the difference that we have to activate the address family also under your ISIS process. So in a single level ISIS implementation, all the routers are in the same area. They will only generate one LSP. So every router is going to generate just one LSP, something similar to OSPF. If you remember in OSPF, if everybody is in the same area, they only send one LSA1, which contains a list of prefixes. Similarly here in ISIS, every router is going to generate just one single LSP representing their prefixes. At the same time, if it's a broadcast segment, there would be one more pseudonode LSP generated, something like OSPF again, where we have LSA2 in OSPF, which is network LSA, when there's a DR present. So here, if you do have a DR or a DIS, which is an ISIS, in that case, a pseudonode LSP would be generated. If you do a show ISIS database, you'd only see one database information, one level of database, because everybody is in the same area. So if I look at this show ISIS database, you can see that I have router 1, the LSP ID. The first one is your first LSP that every router is going to generate, and the second LSP ID is your pseudonode LSP ID. You can always verify that with show ISIS database. Since all the routers are basically running level 2, they would only have one database information, which is level 2 database information. They would not maintain level 1. But by default, they would maintain both because the routers are L1 and L2 routers. So let's quickly implement this. We will quickly implement single level routing of ISIS, just basically maintaining just one single database. I'll take three routers, two iOS XE and one XR. So I would connect maybe router 3, router 6. They both are iOS XE, and I would connect router 6 to XR. And we will implement a single level implementation of ISIS. So maybe we could implement as level 1, or we could implement this as level 2. In fact, I'll show you both. I'll first convert the routers to run level 1 only, and then I'll change that to level 2 only. So let's go back to our routers. We'll take our three routers, which is going to be R3, R6, and XR1. Let's start off with R3, which is an iOS XE. So as of right now, I do have my interfaces already pre-configured with IP addresses. So let's activate ISIS and put them in one level. As I told you earlier, that by default, all the routers are level 1, level 2 routers, which means they will maintain two databases. So level 1 database and level 2 database. Since we want them to be running just a single database, which is just level 1 or level 2, I would convert them to be just level 1 or level 2. That's going to be done by going to router ISIS and then defining a net statement, which is your network entity title. So here I have my area portion, which is going to be 49001. So this is my area portion. Then I have my unique system ID, which is basically going to be 6 bytes. So let's give this as 3333.3333.3333.00, which is my network selector, which is always 00. The next thing that I would do would be to go to my interface and activate ISIS. That's going to be done by going to my interface gig 1.36 and saying IP router ISIS. I haven't changed my router to be just a level 1 or just a level 2. The whole concept of single level routing is that every router is in the same area. So it's not based on the database as such, whether you have just level 1 database or level 2 database. It basically means that every router is in the same area, which is called as single level routing. So you and me are in the same area. So something like OSPF, intra area, that's what single level routing is. So if I'm routing between areas, then that would not be single level. So as of right now, I would configure R3, R6, and XR1 in the area 49001. So once I have activated ISIS, I will show you my database, show ISIS database. That's going to show me level 1 database also, level 2 database also. That's because a router is a level 1, level 2 router by default. Let's go and change this to be just level 2. So router, ISIS, and here I would say IS type level 2 only. Once I've done this, if I go back and do a show ISIS database, I should see only level 2 database. I'm not maintaining level 1 database. Let's go back to 6 and do exactly the same thing. Router ISIS and net 490001. So they both are in the same area, but the system ID must be unique. So 6666.00. And then finally, I go back to my interface 36, where I would say IP router ISIS. So I'm activating ISIS on this interface. So now R3 and R6 should establish an ISIS adjacency with each other. Let's go and verify that. Show ISIS neighbors. I have L2 adjacency with R3 because R3 is only a level 2 router. Again, let's change this to be just level 2. So IS type level 2. My loopback is not being advertised right now. I could advertise my loopback by going to my loopback and activating ISIS. That's one way. But then you don't want ISIS to be running on the loopback, but you still want to advertise the loopback. That can be done with passive interface command. So maybe if I do a passive interface loopback 0, my loopback would be advertised as a route. Let's go back to 3 and also advertise the loopback under ISIS and say passive interface loopback 0. And now if I do a show IP route ISIS, I should see the loopback of R6 being learned from R6. On R3, I should see the loopback of R6. So as you can see, I see level 2. So in level 2, you and me could be in the same area, or we could be in different areas. Doesn't really matter. But the whole meaning of single level routing means you and me are in the same area. Whether we keep the router as level 1, level 2, doesn't really matter. Whether I keep the router as L1 only or L2 only, doesn't really matter. As long as you and me are in the same area, it's called as level 1 routing or single level routing. Let's now go to XR1 and activate ISIS on XR1. That's going to be done with router ISIS. And we have to specify the process ID, let's say 1. And the first thing that you would do here would be that you should activate your address family for IPv4 because we want address family IPv4. So address family IPv4 unicast, and then we can say passive interface loopback 0, and because we want to advertise a loopback also. So if you remember, an ISIS requires a net statement. A net statement is mandatory. So XR1 should be in the same area if you're doing single level routing, but the system ID has to be unique. So let's give a net as 49.0001, so which means they're in the same area. And then let's give a unique system ID 1919.1919.1919.00. So once I have my system ID defined, let's activate ISIS on my physical interface. So that's going to be with interface loopback 0, address family IPv4 unicast, and then passive. Make sure you give the passive command because you don't want to activate ISIS, but you still want to advertise your loopback. And then we have the interface gig0000.619. Here I would just say address family IPv4 unicast. Let's do a commit. I should establish an ISIS adjacency with R6. I still haven't changed my IS type to be a level 2 only. It's still by default level 1, level 2. However, I would only establish level 2 adjacency with R6 because R6 is running only level 2. So let's verify our neighborship. Show ISIS neighbors. I should establish a neighborship. Let's go and check my interface. So if I check my show router ISIS, I can see that, so I do have the net statement, I have a unique system ID, I have activated address family, and the loopback has the passive command, which means that don't activate ISIS, but still advertise the loopback. And I have gig 0.0.0.619, which has address family IPv4 unicast activated. So I should establish an ISIS adjacency. Let's re-verify. Let's verify our connectivity first. So ping 20.6.19.19. So I do have back-to-back connectivity. Let's see why ISIS hasn't been activated. Okay, so my neighborship is not coming up. The problem could be maybe I have not activated ISIS on R6 or on XR1. In fact, we did verify XR1, that XR1 was correctly configured. So let's go and check R6 also. So show run interface gig 1.619. This is the interface that connects to XR1. I did not activate ISIS on that interface. That's why the neighborship is not forming. So let's go back there to R6 under gig 1.619 and say IP router ISIS. Once I activate ISIS, I should establish an ISIS adjacency with XR1. And if I do a show IP route ISIS, I should see the loopback of R3 and the loopback of XR1. So now this type of an implementation where I have all the routers in one area is called as single level implementation of ISIS. They basically are in the same area. It doesn't matter whether you do it as level 2 only or you do it as level 1. If they're in the same area, it's called single level ISIS or single level routing. I'll show you by changing it to level 1 only. So if I do a show ISI's database, you can see that I have only level 1 information or level 2 information. I do not have level 1. So because router XR1 has not been changed to level 2 only, he's still maintaining level 1. Otherwise, by default, if I change this to level 2, he would only maintain level 2. But because by default they are level 1, level 2 routers, he maintains both. So what I'm going to do right now is go back to XR1, change this to IS type to level 2 only, and then we can see the database again if we are maintaining level 1 or just level 2. So router IS1, and let's give the command IS type level 2 only. Let's do a commit and look back at show ISI's database. Now you can see that I'm only maintaining level 2. I'm going to repeat the same thing again. It's really important for you to understand that when I say single level routing, it does not really mean that you have just IPv4 or just IPv6 or IPv4 and IPv6. It basically means that you and me are in the same area. That's called single level routing because we are in the same area. Let's go and change this IS type to be level 1 only. If you look at my routing table to show route ISIs, you'll see that all the routes are being seen as level 2 because you and me are level 2 neighbors. Let me change this to be now just level 1. So IS type level 1. And do a commit. Obviously, my neighborship with R6 would go down because R6 can only establish L2 adjacency, and XR1 has now been changed to level 1. So they would not form neighbors. So going back to R6, under router ISIs, I would say IS type level 1. And same thing I would do on R3. Router ISIs, IS type level 1. So now if I do a show ISI's neighbors, we should be level 1 neighbors only, not level 2. And my database should only have level 1 information. I would not see level 2 information. Let's go to 6 and verify if he has formed neighbors with XR1. So with XR1, he has already formed neighbors. But with R3, he has still not established adjacency. Now he has formed L1 adjacency. It takes a bit of time, but my neighborship is back up. If I check my show ISI's database, this time I would see level 1 information. And this is my pseudo node LSP on the segment towards R3, and this is on the segment towards XR1. So basically R6 is my DIS. There's no BDR concept in ISIs. Okay, so this is basically single level routing. I hope this video was informative to you, and thank you for viewing.